September 1940. Britain stood alone. The Luftwaffe commanded the skies with numerical superiority that seemed insurmountable. RAF Fighter Command was bleeding pilots faster than training squadrons could replace them. Every sortie meant probable death. Then over the Kent coastline, a pilot with half his instruments shattered, and his Spitfire hemorrhaging hydraulic fluid did something that shattered every rule in the tactical manual, and in 20 minutes of sustained combat, turned the hunter into the hunted, destroying 7 Me-109s through sheer audacity and a maneuver so counterintuitive that German pilots never saw it coming. 11th of September 1940, 14:23 hours. RAF Biggin Hill, Kent. The operations room stank of sweat, stale cigarette smoke, and the metallic tang of fear that no amount of British stoicism could completely mask. Flight Lieutenant James Ashford stood before the scramble board, watching another squadron's name being wiped clean. 12 Spitfires dispatched that morning, 4 returned. The mathematics were inescapable and brutal. Since 10th July, Fighter Command had lost 832 aircraft. Pilot casualties exceeded 300. The Luftwaffe possessed numerical superiority of approximately 4.1 in fighters alone. Reichsmarschall Göring's strategy was simple mathematics, attritional warfare until the RAF ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. British factories produced Spitfires faster than the Germans anticipated, but pilots required months of training that command simply didn't possess. Every day, inexperienced boys, barely out of training command, were thrown against battle-hardened Luftwaffe veterans who'd cut their teeth over Poland, France, and the Low Countries. Ashford was 24, which made him practically ancient by squadron standards. Grammar school boy from Manchester, engineering apprentice before the war, accepted into the RAF on his third application because his technical knowledge compensated for his working-class accent. He'd survived 47 combat sorties through a combination of paranoid situational awareness and an engineering mind that understood his aircraft's capabilities with mathematical precision. But survival wasn't victory. The squadron had lost 9 pilots in the past fortnight. Replacement pilots arrived with barely 60 hours on Spitfires, no combat experience, and an average life expectancy measured in days. The fundamental problem was tactical doctrine itself. RAF tactics emphasized tight formations, disciplined attacks, textbook maneuvers developed in peacetime against cooperative targets. The Luftwaffe had abandoned such nonsense after Spain. Their pilots fought like aerial assassins, fast, brutal, opportunistic. They exploited altitude advantage, attacked from the sun, and disengaged the moment a fight turned unfavorable. British pilots following peacetime doctrine died following the rules. Ashford had spent the past 3 months documenting every combat engagement in meticulous detail. He'd interviewed surviving pilots, studied gun camera footage, analyzed loss reports, and reached a conclusion that would get him court-martialed if he expressed it to anyone above squadron leader. Everything Fighter Command taught about aerial combat was comprehensively wrong. The Luftwaffe held every advantage. Their Me-109s operated from captured French airfields, barely 20 minutes flying time from Kent. They could loiter, choose their moment, and return home with fuel to spare. British pilots scrambled reactively, climbed desperately, engaged whilst already disadvantaged, and landed with fuel tanks reading empty. The 109's fuel-injected Daimler-Benz engine didn't cut out during negative G maneuvers like the Spitfire's carburetor-fed Merlin. German pilots could push the stick forward and dive away from danger. British pilots attempting the same maneuver experienced engine cutout for critical seconds, more than sufficient time to become a target. The tactical manual solution was maintaining altitude advantage and avoiding negative G maneuvers entirely. Lovely theory. Utterly useless when you were scrambled late, climbing through 15,000 feet whilst the enemy attacked from 20,000. You fought at disadvantage or you ran. Running meant German bombers reached their targets. Staying meant dying by the rulebook. Ashford had spent 6 weeks testing a theory during training flights, always alone, always at extreme altitude, where nobody would witness what he was attempting. The Merlin engine's carburetor limitation could be exploited rather than avoided. The Germans knew Spitfires couldn't follow them into negative G dives. They'd grown complacent about it. Ashford believed he could turn that complacency into a weapon, but the maneuver required flying his aircraft in a manner that would horrify any instructor and violated every principle of energy management in aerial combat. Today, he'd get his chance to prove it, not through choice, through catastrophic misfortune that left him no alternative except death or attempting something so monumentally reckless that it redefined the concept of desperation. The scramble bell shattered the afternoon. Squadron scramble, Angels 2-0, Vector 120, large enemy formation approaching Dover. Ashford ran, parachute already fastened, May West already secured, helmet grabbed mid-stride. Ground crew had his Spitfire's Merlin engine running. He vaulted onto the wing, dropped into the cockpit, strapped in with muscle memory perfected through repetition. Throttle forward, tail up, airborne in less than 90 seconds from the bell. 12 Spitfires climbed hard through broken cloud. The controller's voice crackled through the RT, clipped and urgent. Bandits 50+, Angels 2-2, approaching from the southeast, bombers with fighter escort. They wouldn't reach altitude in time. They never did. The Germans timed their attacks with precision, catching British squadrons during the vulnerable climb phase. Ashford's altimeter read 18,000 feet when he spotted them. A massive formation of Dornier bombers in tight defensive boxes surrounded by Me-109s stacked in layers above and behind. The 109s had at least 4,000 feet of altitude advantage. Textbook killing position, the squadron leader's voice, attacking bombers, each section independently, good luck. They climbed into the maelstrom. The engagement began exactly as statistics predicted, badly. Ashford selected a Dornier formation, lined up his sights, and barely managed 2 seconds of firing before tracers flashed past his canopy. Me-109 diving from altitude, attacking with mathematical precision. He broke hard left, pulling maximum G, vision tunneling as blood drained from his brain. The 109 overshot, they always did when diving at high speed, but 2 more were already positioning for follow-up attacks. This was how pilots died, fixated on bombers whilst fighters murdered them from above. Ashford abandoned his attack run and reversed hard right, trying to gain energy, trying to survive the next 30 seconds. The sky had become a 3-dimensional nightmare of tracer fire, burning aircraft, and disintegrating formations. His RT screamed with urgent calls, "Break right! I'm hit! Bailing out!" He saw a Spitfire falling in flames, then another, spinning vertically with half its tail missing. 6 minutes into combat, and the squadron was already shattered. The bombers continued onwards unmolested. The Me-109s controlled the engagement completely, attacking with impunity, disengaging at will. British pilots could chase, but never catch them. The moment a Spitfire tried pursuing a diving 109, the German pushed forward on his stick, went negative G, and his fuel-injected engine kept running. Spitfire pilots attempting the same maneuver experienced engine cutout. Those critical seconds of powerless flight meant death. Ashford latched onto a 109 that had made the mistake of climbing after an attack. He closed to 200 yards, compensated for deflection, pressed the firing button. 8 Browning machine guns converged on target. Strikes sparkled across the 109's fuselage, then his windscreen exploded. Cannon shell from another 109 he hadn't seen. The canopy disintegrated into thousands of fragments. Windblast hit him like a physical blow, temperature dropping instantly to -20 Celsius at 19,000 feet. His goggles were ripped away. His face went numb in seconds. The instrument panel had been shredded, airspeed indicator destroyed, altimeter cracked, compass shattered. His gun sight had been blown off its mounting entirely. Worse, something was wrong with the control column. It vibrated in his hands with a sickening resonance that meant structural damage. He looked right and saw horror. His starboard wing had 3 massive holes punched through it by cannon shells. Metal skin was peeling back. The entire wingtip was flexing in ways that wings absolutely should not flex. He should disengage. Any rational pilot would disengage. His aircraft was critically damaged. Half his instruments were destroyed, and he was flying half-blind in sub-zero temperatures with wind blast making precise aiming impossible. But disengaging meant abandoning what remained of his squadron. 8 Spitfires were still engaged against at least 30 Me-109s. Leaving meant more of his friends would die. The damaged wing changed everything. The aircraft's flight characteristics were completely compromised. It pulled constantly to starboard, requiring continuous left aileron pressure to maintain level flight. Maximum speed was reduced to perhaps 260 mt/s, catastrophically slow by combat standards. He couldn't dogfight. He couldn't run. By conventional tactical standards, he was already dead, but the damage also liberated him from conventional tactical thinking. He had nothing to lose. The aircraft was unflyable by normal standards. His instruments were destroyed. He couldn't follow the rulebook because the rulebook presumed functioning equipment. For the first time in 47 sorties, he was completely free to attempt his theory without career-ending consequences. The theory was simple. Exploit enemy complacency about Spitfire limitations by doing exactly what they knew Spitfires couldn't do, and accepting catastrophic consequences that would destroy any normal aircraft but might, just possibly, work with an already damaged machine that had nothing left to lose. He spotted a formation of 4 Me-109s circling above the combat, waiting for opportunities. Classic German tactics. Altitude advantage, patience, opportunism. They were focused downwards, watching for vulnerable targets below. Nobody expected threats from damaged aircraft barely maintaining altitude. Ashford pushed his damaged Spitfire into a shallow climb, nursing what remained of his engine power. The 109s didn't react. Why would they? Damaged Spitfire, visibly trailing smoke, struggling to maintain altitude. Not a threat. Target of opportunity once their current attacks concluded. He reached their altitude through sheer bloody-mindedness and pointed his aircraft directly at the nearest 109. No gun sight meant no precision aiming. But at point-blank range, precision wasn't necessary. He closed to 150 yards before the German pilot noticed him, saw the 109 beginning to roll away. Too late. Ashford triggered his remaining functional guns. 6 machine guns still firing, 2 jammed from damage. Tracers walked across the 109's fuselage. The German's canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell away, trailing smoke. The formation scattered, 3 109s diving hard, using their standard escape maneuver, negative G dive that Spitfires couldn't follow. This was the moment his theory would succeed or kill him. Probably both. Ashford pushed the stick forward, hard. The Merlin engine coughed, stuttered, and died. Exactly as predicted. The Spitfire went ballistic, powerless, following a parabolic trajectory that should have been suicide. But his damaged wing changed the equation fundamentally. The structural damage meant the wing was already flexing abnormally. The negative G forces that would overstress an undamaged wing were being absorbed by damage that was already compromising structural integrity. The aircraft wasn't flying anymore. It was falling in a controlled manner that happened to align with where the 109s were diving. He counted 3 seconds. The Merlin engine caught again as positive G returned. He pulled back savagely on the stick. The aircraft shuddered, complained, but responded. He'd maintained visual contact through the dive. The 109s were directly ahead, pulling out of their dive, presuming they'd escaped. He closed to 100 yards and fired. The nearest 109 exploded instantly, fuel tanks detonating. Ashford flew through the debris field, metal fragments hammering his already damaged aircraft. A second 109 tried braking right. Ashford ignored his aircraft's damaged handling, forced it into a skidding turn that should have stalled it, and fired a 2-second burst that cut the 109 in half. He destroyed 3 Me-109s in 90 seconds through a maneuver that shouldn't exist. And now every German pilot in the sky knew something impossible had just occurred. The German formation's tactical cohesion disintegrated in real time. The Me-109s that had been confidently prosecuting coordinated attacks suddenly found themselves confronted by an impossibility, a Spitfire that could follow them through negative G maneuvers. Their fundamental tactical advantage had evaporated. Radio chatter erupted in German. Confusion, disbelief, urgent warnings that made no sense according to established doctrine. From a Luftwaffe perspective, the situation was incomprehensible. Intelligence reports confirmed Spitfires couldn't execute negative G maneuvers without engine failure. Captured RAF pilots confirmed it. Gun camera footage confirmed it. 3 years of accumulated combat data confirmed it. Every successful disengagement by Me-109 pilots relied on this absolute physical limitation of the enemy's aircraft. It was as fundamental to Luftwaffe tactics as fuel capacity or ammunition load. Except now, a clearly damaged Spitfire, visibly trailing smoke, wing structure compromised, flying in a manner that suggested critical systems failure, was systematically destroying 109s by executing maneuvers that violated known performance characteristics. German pilots watching from altitude couldn't reconcile observation with doctrine. Some presumed it was a different aircraft type. Others believed the pilot had somehow modified his engine. The most experienced simply recognized they were witnessing something tactically revolutionary and extremely dangerous. Oberleutnant Franz Kessler had flown 127 combat missions. He'd destroyed 18 Allied aircraft over Poland, France, and Britain. He understood aerial combat with the instinctive precision of a natural predator. He watched the damaged Spitfire destroy its 3rd kill and immediately understood this wasn't about technical modification. This was about operational doctrine, being deliberately violated by someone who'd calculated the consequences and decided the tactical advantage outweighed the risk. The British pilot was using battle damage as camouflage for intentionally suicidal flying that turned defensive limitations into offensive advantages. The Germans had grown complacent about Spitfire engine limitations. They'd built an entire tactical doctrine around exploiting it. Now that complacency was killing them. Kessler ordered his swarm to engage the damaged Spitfire with extreme caution, treat it as an experimental aircraft with unknown capabilities, maintain energy advantage, do not commit to pursuit. The problem, every experienced Luftwaffe pilot in this engagement had watched comrades die, attempting to escape using a maneuver that always worked. Suddenly the rules had changed, but combat instincts developed through hundreds of hours couldn't be overridden by radio commands. Ashford's aircraft was disintegrating incrementally. The starboard wing's structural damage was worsening with each violent maneuver. His engine was running rough, oil pressure fluctuating. He'd lost 3 more instruments to vibration damage. His face was so cold from windblast that he couldn't feel it anymore. Blood from a dozen minor cuts frozen across his face. But the Germans were now fighting defensively. They'd lost tactical initiative because they couldn't trust their standard disengagement procedure. He targeted a 109, attempting to position for a bombing run escort, close to 200 yards. The Germans saw him coming and immediately executed a diving turn, but cautiously, checking constantly, expecting the Spitfire to somehow follow. The hesitation was fatal. Ashford didn't follow the dive. He cut inside the turn, accepted a dangerously low airspeed that brought him to the edge of a stall, and fired a 3-second burst that struck the 109's engine. The German aircraft began trailing smoke and disengaged eastward, losing altitude rapidly. Probable kill, possibly destroyed. 2 more 109s attempted a coordinated attack from opposite directions, textbook scissors maneuver designed to force the target into a defensive position. Ashford responded by doing exactly what Spitfire doctrine prohibited. He pulled into a maximum G turn that greyed out his vision, held it until his airspeed bled to stalling speed, then deliberately spun the aircraft. The maneuver was considered catastrophic loss of control by RAF training standards. At combat altitude, with enemy fighters prosecuting attacks, it was suicide. Except the pursuing Me-109s expected evasive maneuver, not controlled spin. They overshot high, attempting to maintain visual contact with the target that was suddenly tumbling in a manner that suggested the pilot had lost control. Ashford recovered from the spin after 1.5 rotations, exactly as intended, and found himself perfectly positioned below and behind both Me-109s. He climbed hard, closed to lethal range, and destroyed one Me-109 with a single sustained burst. The second escaped by diving vertically, this time without hesitation, accepting the risk of pursuing Spitfire because remaining in the engagement meant certain death. 16 minutes into the engagement, 5 confirmed destroyed, 1 probable. But Ashford's aircraft had reached the absolute limit of structural endurance. The starboard wing was now visibly bending during turns. Control surfaces were responding sluggishly. Engine temperature was climbing into the red. Every instrument that still functioned was indicating imminent catastrophic failure. The remaining Me-109s had abandoned their bomber escort mission and were withdrawing eastward. The bomber formation had already turned back 20 miles short of their target. Unprecedented. Luftwaffe doctrine prioritized mission completion. Bombers withdrew early only when fighter escort had been completely neutralized or destroyed. 8 Spitfires and 1 virtually destroyed aircraft had forced an entire staffel of Me-109s to abandon a planned bombing raid. But 2 Me-109s weren't retreating. They were climbing, circling, positioning for a final engagement against the damaged Spitfire that had shattered their squadron's tactical coherence. These were the most experienced pilots, unwilling to return to base having been defeated by a single enemy aircraft. Pride, professionalism, and fury demanded resolution. Ashford saw them coming. He had perhaps 90 seconds of combat capability remaining before his aircraft literally fell apart. His ammunition counters showed less than 5 seconds of firing time left. He was so cold that his hands were barely responding to commands. His vision was tunneling from exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. But he'd proven his theory absolutely. And if he died now, at least some pilot would study the gun camera footage, understand what he'd done, and teach it to others. He turned to face them, climbing into a fight he couldn't possibly win, with an aircraft that couldn't possibly fly, to prove a principle that couldn't possibly work, according to every tactical manual ever written. It was the most British response imaginable. Acknowledge the impossibility, note the overwhelming disadvantage, and proceed regardless, because surrender wasn't in the bloody vocabulary. The 2 Me-109s came at him from opposite high quarters, coordinated, professional, giving him no good options. Textbook attack that should have ended with his death in approximately 12 seconds. They'd positioned with geometric precision that eliminated every escape vector. They knew his aircraft was damaged. They knew he was low on ammunition. They knew they had him. What they didn't know, Ashford had spent 3 months calculating the mathematics of impossible maneuvers. His engineering background and obsessive study of aerodynamics had revealed something fundamental about the Spitfire's design. The aircraft possessed extraordinary structural strength in specific stress vectors. The negative G limitation wasn't structural, it was purely the carburetor problem. When Wing Commander R.J. Mitchell designed the Spitfire, he'd over-engineered the airframe substantially. The aircraft could survive forces that would destroy other fighters if those forces were applied correctly. Ashford pulled maximum G, rolling inverted whilst climbing. Textbook warned this would instantly induce engine failure and leave him dead in the sky, but his damaged wing meant asymmetrical lift distribution. The forces that should have torn the aircraft apart were channeling through the pre-existing damage, redistributing stress in ways that actually stabilized the structure temporarily. The Merlin coughed but didn't die completely. He maintained partial power through the maneuver by pure luck and divine intervention. The 109s adjusted, splitting their attack to maintain pincer advantage. But Ashford wasn't evading. He was closing. Turning towards one attacker whilst inverted and partially powered, accepting the other attacker's free shot for 3 critical seconds of opportunity. The second 109 fired. Cannon shells passed beneath his inverted aircraft, missing by inches because the German pilot expected evasion, not aggressive closing maneuver. Ashford rolled upright directly in front of the first 109 at a range of 75 yards. Point blank. His remaining machine guns fired for 2.3 seconds before ammunition exhausted. Every round struck, the Me-109's cockpit disintegrated. The aircraft snap-rolled left and fell away. Pilot certainly dead. Aircraft certainly destroyed. 6 confirmed kills in 19 minutes. His engine died completely, not sputtered, died. Total power loss. The propeller windmilled uselessly. His aircraft transitioned from powered flight to gliding brick instantaneously. The second Me-109 was positioning for a killing shot from behind. Ashford had no ammunition, no engine, no options except gravity. He deliberately stalled the aircraft. The Spitfire fell nose down into a spin. The 109 pilot, expecting controlled flight, overshot high and right. Ashford recovered from the spin after 2 rotations, trading altitude for airspeed, turning his powerless aircraft into a gliding weapon. The 109 pilot, realizing his target wasn't dead, attempted to re-engage. But Ashford was now diving at maximum velocity, with no engine resistance, achieving speeds that a powered Spitfire couldn't safely reach. He aligned his powerless aircraft with the climbing 109. No ammunition, no engine. One option remaining: collision. The German pilot saw it coming with probably 3 seconds warning, saw the damaged Spitfire diving directly at him with clear intent to ram, saw a pilot so absolutely committed to destroying him that death was acceptable outcome. The 109 pilot broke, rolled hard right, disengaged, dove away from the engagement and didn't return. Ashford didn't follow. He couldn't, having no engine. He simply trimmed his aircraft for maximum glide ratio and pointed it towards the Kent coastline 28 miles distant. He landed 14 minutes later in a pasture 7 miles north of Dover, touching down at 95 mph in a field barely 400 yards long. The Spitfire's landing gear collapsed on contact. The aircraft slewed sideways, tearing through a hedgerow, and came to rest inverted against an oak tree. Ashford hung upside down in his straps, bleeding from numerous cuts, so cold he couldn't unfasten his harness, but alive and conscious. Local Home Guard arrived within minutes, expecting to find a corpse or captured German. Instead, they found a barely conscious RAF pilot who kept repeating, 7, confirmed 7, somebody write that down, 7, Me-109s. New doctrine, write it down. Intelligence officers debriefed him for 6 hours. They interviewed the 5 surviving pilots from his squadron. They examined gun camera footage from his aircraft. Miraculously, the camera had survived. They studied the wreckage. They sent engineers to analyze the structural damage. And slowly, inevitably, they reached the same conclusion Ashford had reached 3 months earlier. Everything Fighter Command had taught about energy management and negative G limitations was fundamentally incomplete. The maneuver Ashford had executed wasn't sustainable for undamaged aircraft. It would overstress the airframe long-term. But in critical situations, for short durations, against opponents who absolutely believed you couldn't execute certain maneuvers, the tactical advantage was overwhelming. More importantly, the psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots was profound. If Spitfires could follow Me-109s through negative G dives, the Germans' primary disengagement tactic was compromised. They'd need to develop new doctrine, new tactics, new training. 3 weeks later, Air Ministry issued Technical Memorandum 427C, marked Secret Operational Priority. It detailed a modified technique for negative G maneuvers, incorporating carburetor float chamber modifications and pilot technique adjustments. Miss Beatrice Tilly Schilling, an engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, developed a simple metal flow restrictor that partially solved the carburetor problem. It became standard equipment across all fighter squadrons by January 1941. Miss Schilling's orifice, pilots called it, with typically British humour about technical solutions to mortality. Pilot survival rates increased measurably. The Luftwaffe's kill ratios began declining as British pilots exploited tactical advantages previously considered impossible. German intelligence reports noted the change, but struggled to understand the underlying cause. How had British aircraft suddenly gained capabilities they previously lacked? Ashford received a Distinguished Flying Cross at a ceremony he attended on crutches, still recovering from hypothermia, facial lacerations, and 3 cracked ribs. He never flew combat operations again. His injuries ensured that. Instead, he was assigned to the Central Fighter Establishment, teaching advanced tactics to new pilots. He spent the remainder of the war lecturing about his 20-minute engagement over Kent, emphasizing a simple principle: doctrine exists to guide you, not constrain you. When circumstances demanded, rules could be bent. Sometimes they needed to be shattered completely. By 1943, RAF pilots routinely executed maneuvers that would have been court-martial offenses in 1940. Fighter Command's tactical manual had been comprehensively rewritten. Energy management doctrine now incorporated aggressive negative G maneuvers as standard technique. The Ashford turn, though he hated the name, became required curriculum. The 7 Me-109s he destroyed that afternoon represented more than just statistical achievement. They represented the moment when British aerial doctrine stopped being defensive and reactive and became adaptive and aggressive. One pilot, one damaged aircraft, one impossible engagement that proved improvisation could defeat superior numbers when conventional wisdom was abandoned. Ashford survived the war, returned to Manchester, and resumed his engineering apprenticeship. He never spoke publicly about the engagement. When journalists found him in 1965 seeking interviews for the Battle of Britain's 25th anniversary, he declined repeatedly. Finally, pressed by a particularly persistent reporter, he offered one quote: "I was terrified, freezing, and certain I'd die. I did something desperately reckless because I had no alternative. The only remarkable thing was surviving. Every pilot in Fighter Command showed the same courage daily. I simply happened to survive long enough for people to notice." The 7 Me-109s destroyed in 20 minutes became legend. The damaged Spitfire's remains were preserved at the RAF Museum. The gun camera footage became required viewing for every fighter pilot trainee. But the real legacy wasn't mechanical or tactical, it was cultural. It proved that British pilots could match German experience through innovation rather than attrition. That improvisation under desperate circumstances could defeat doctrine developed through careful planning. That sometimes the most effective response to overwhelming odds was attacking them with such audacity that the enemy's assumptions became their vulnerability. By the time historians gained access to declassified Luftwaffe records in the 1970s, they discovered something remarkable in German operational reports from September 1940, multiple references to modified Spitfire variants with enhanced capabilities. The Germans had convinced themselves British factories had developed new aircraft types to explain performance that contradicted intelligence assessments. They never understood the truth. It wasn't the aircraft that had changed. It was the willingness of one pilot to fly his damaged machine in ways that shouldn't work, betting his life on engineering calculations and desperate necessity and proving that doctrine was always provisional when confronted by someone sufficiently determined to rewrite the rules completely. If this story of extraordinary courage and innovation captivated you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from the Second World War. We uncover the forgotten heroes and pivotal moments that changed history. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What other remarkable tales from the Battle of Britain should we explore? Your engagement helps us bring these vital stories to light. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is written by those who refuse to accept the impossible.